at a low rate, it might be that you wouldn't really be paying interest at all if the dollar inflation is fast enough. Because by the time you reach the end, you would maybe have paid back only as much in adjusted value as what you borrowed. And now, in Muhammad's time, probably the Byzantine money did not have much inflation. I don't know the history. In general, money has been associated in popular views with moral or ethical faults, like greed, avarice, selfishness, and lack of charity. But on the other hand, the existence of money often makes it easy to make valuable donations of philanthropic sorts, and the parties receiving such contributions tend to find it most helpful when the donations are received as money. But the New Testament story about money changers being driven from the temple illustrates clearly the idea of putting the evidently mundane and possibly unclean utility of money at some distance from where that money would presumably continue to be received when used as a vehicle for donation. Economics has been called the dismal science, and it's certainly an area of studies where the mundane is appropriately studied. And philosophically viewed, money exists only because humanity does not live under Garden of Eden conditions, under specializations of labor functions. So we're always exchanging, mediated by money transfers, the differing fruits of our varied forms of labor. Welfare economics. Of course, now with the recession or depression, the idea of welfare economics comes to the forefront, and there are different ideas of what might be done. And if you think about it, of course, you look into them, they could possibly affect different parties of the population, and different classes might be most benefited. A related topic which you can't fully consider in a few paragraphs is that of the efforts to be made by the national state and society in general for dealing with social equity and concerns for general economic welfare. Here the key viewpoint is methodological, as we see it, as I see it. How should society and the state authorities seek to improve economic welfare generally, and what should be done at times of abnormal economic difficulties or depression? We can't go into it all, but we feel that actions which are clearly understandable as designed for the purpose of achieving a social welfare result are best. And in particular, programs of unemployment compensation seem to be comparatively well structured so that they can operate in proportion to the need. So as soon as employment picks up, then there's not much expense for unemployment compensation. And public works projects allow the wealthy to pay through taxes to provide jobs for workers, and these can produce valuable works if the projects are well planned. Times of economic, there should probably be some way of planning them more in advance, because at the crisis it's harder to develop well-planned public works projects. Times of economic crisis may be compared, we feel, with occasions of great windstorms in nature. So if we wish to minimize the human suffering resulting from typhoons or hurricanes, what should we do? Should we try somehow to control these storms so that they will cause little trouble? Or should we try to be well prepared for them so that they will cause less damage and trouble. There's a memorable Bible story in which Joseph counsels the Pharaoh of Egypt concerning a dream. Joseph says that the dream indicates that 7 lean years may follow after 7 fat years, so that with a well-stocked granary, that Pharaoh could be prepared for the lean years when they come. Analogously, in modern economic context, a nation could seek to be prepared to handle unemployment compensation during a quite extended time of lean years. We think that this would be more practical than trying to use national central banking manipulations to prevent the coming of global storms of the economic variety. And then some theoretical concepts. Money, utility, and game theory. So my key and connection is through the game theory, so I bring out some connections. In the sort of game theory that is studied and applied by economists, the concept of utility is very fundamental and essential. But Neumann and Morgenstern give a notably good and thorough treatment of utility in their book on game theory and economic behavior. The concept of utility, mathematical, does indeed predate the book of Neumann and Morgenstern. And for example, as a concept, mathematical utility can be traced back to a paper published in 1886 in Pisa by G.B. Antonelli. When one studies what are called cooperative games, which in economic terms include mergers and acquisitions or cartel formation, it is found to be appropriate and standard to form 2 basic classifications: games with transferable utility and games without transferable utility. It could be that there are people living in countries which could have local currencies or restricted currencies. They cannot actually exchange them and send them abroad. And then they might be able, some deal could be arranged, but they couldn't use money. They could use more of a barter, I think. In games, the world of practical utilities, it is money which typically causes the existence of a game of type 1 rather than type 2, transferable utility. Money is the lubrication which enables the efficient transfer of utility. And generally, if games can be transformed from type 2 to type 1, there is a gain on average to all the players in terms of whatever might be expected to be the outcome. But this function of money in generally facilitating the transfer of utility would seem to be as well performed by the currency of Zimbabwe as by that of Switzerland. Or the question can be asked, how do good money and bad money differ, if at all, for the valuable function of facilitating utility transfer? But if we consider contracts having a relatively long time axis, then the difference can be seen clearly. Consider a society where the money in use is subject to a rapid and unpredictable rate of inflation. So the money worth 100 now might be worth from 50 to 10 by a year from now. Who would want to lend money for the term of a year? In this context, we can see how the quality of a money standard can strongly influence areas of the economy involving financing with longer-term credits. And also, if we view money as of importance in connection with transfers of utility, we can see that money itself is a sort of utility, using the word in another sense, comparable to supplies of water, electric energy, or telecommunications. And then if you think about it, we can consider the quality of money as comparable to the quality of some public utility, like the supply of electric energy or water. Keynesians. The theory, I have to break off this, the theory, wait, the thinking of J.M. Keynes himself was actually multidimensional, and consequently, there are quite different varieties of the persons at the present time who follow in one way or another some of the thinking of Keynes. And of course, some of his thinking was scientifically accurate, and that's not disputable. For example, an early book written by Keynes was a mathematical text, a treatise on probability. The label Keynesian is convenient and also appropriate because the Keynesians call themselves Keynesians. But to be safe in criticism, we should have a defined meaning for this as a party that can be criticized and contrasted with other parties. So let us define Keynesian to be descriptive of a school of thought that originated at the time of the devaluations of the pound and the dollar in the early 30s of the 20th century. Then more specifically, a Keynesian would favor the existence of a manipulative state establishment of central bank and treasury, which would continuously seek to achieve economic welfare objectives with comparatively little regard for the long-term reputation of the national currency and the associated effects of that on the reputation of financial enterprises domestic to the state. And indeed, a famous remark of Keynes was, in the long run, we're all dead. A critique of the science of the Keynesian. It's difficult to make a criticism here because so much of the scientific research work, particularly of American economists, in the years since, say, the 30s, has been in the area of the study of the topic called macroeconomics. And almost all of this work has a Keynesian orientation. I think there's a good analogy to mathematical theories like, for example, class field theory. In mathematics, a set of axioms can be taken as a foundation, and then an area for theoretical study is brought into being. For example, if one set of axioms is specified and accepted, we have the theory of rings. Whereas if another set of axioms is a foundation, we have the theory of Wolfgang loops. So from a critical point of view, the theory of macroeconomics of the Keynesians is like the theory of plane geometry without the axiom of Euclid that was classically called the parallel postulate. It is an interesting fact that in the history of science that there was a time before the 19th century when mathematicians were speculating that this axiom or postulate was not necessary, that it should be derivable from the others. So I feel that the macroeconomics of the Keynesians is comparable to a scientific study of a mathematical area which is carried out with an insufficient set of axioms. And the result is analogous to the situation in plane geometry. The plane does not need to be really flat, and the area within a circle can expand hyperbolically as a function of the radius, rather than merely with the square of the radius. This picture suggests the pattern of inflation that can result in a country over extended time periods when there's continually a certain amount of gradual inflation. In Turkey, they had a lira, which coincidentally has the same name as the Italian former Italian currency. And they recently came to the point that they made a change that 1 million of the old lira become 1 new lira. This is the sort of thing that sometimes is done when there's been a tremendous amount of inflation. That shows how very gradually you build up till you have the factor of 1 million. The missing axiom is simply an accepted axiom that the money